This is the Tame Aperture podcast.
Open the pod bay doors, Cal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
Welcome to the Tame Aperture podcast, where we dive deep on films from first-time directors, indies, art house, and much, much more. Today on the podcast, we take a look into contemporary director and former video sales associate, Quentin Tarantino, and his 1992 directorial debut, Reservoir Dogs, starring Harvey Keitel, Tim Roth, Steve Buscemi, among many, many others, including Tarantino himself. When a simple jewelry heist goes horribly wrong, the surviving criminals begin to suspect that one of them is a police informant. Reservoir Dogs is a 1992 American crime film about a group of diamond thieves whose planned heist of jewelry store goes terribly wrong. The film depicts the events before and after the heist. It incorporates many motifs that have become Tarantino's hallmarks: violent crime, pop culture references, profanity, and non-linear storytelling. Reservoir Dogs premiered at the Sundance Film Festival in January 1992. It became the festival's most talked about film and was subsequently picked up for distribution by Miramax Films after being shown at several film festivals, including Cannes and Toronto. Reservoir Dogs was generally well received, with the cast being praised by many critics. Despite not being heavily promoted during its theatrical run, the film became a modest success in the United States after grossing $2.8 million against its $1.2 million budget. I'm Gabe Vienendahl, filmmaker, film instructor, and movie enthusiast, and I'm joined today by Alan Martindale, veteran podcaster and editor. Alan, how the hell are you?
Doing much better this week.
This is
a better Harvey Keitel. This is more fun than last week's Harvey Keitel
yeah,
movie.
because last week we did Harvey Keitel in Scorsese's Who's That Knocking at My Door. This week we get Keitel again in Reservoir Dogs. This is an interesting film. It gets a lot of accolade. Mm-hmm. Not initially, as I kind of read in the opening there. Wasn't a whole lot of... It had moderate success, but later became bigger and more cult-like years later. What's interesting is I think because it's a Tarantino film, it became even larger as Tarantino grew. So when he first made it, it was there and it was kind of in the ether of filmmaking. And as he grew his own brand as a director, this film also grew a bigger following.
Yeah, for sure.
It wasn't like it came out the gates, and it got praised, right? I mean, everyone enjoyed it, and it was a good film. It got picked up by Miramax. That's a big distributor. But it wasn't it's grown since that time. It didn't come out a smashing success.
Right.
And it didn't come out a smashing success in the culture, grew over time.
It almost feels like a lot, and I could be wrong. I could be way off base, and people could be yelling at their phones right now listening to this. But it seems like back in this era of the early Sundance days, it seems like movies that did really well there didn't necessarily go on to be big, at least right out the gate. Good movies for sure, but they didn't have immediate success. If I'm not mistaken, remember Sex, Lies, and Videotape was one of them. That was never really a huge movie. Clerks is another one that was never really that huge. I mean, it's more kind of like this.
Cult following.
It's got a cult following for sure.
As does Sex, Lies, and Videotape. Matter of fact, we did a podcast on Sex, Lies, and Videotape. But you're right. I think that these, at least in those late 80s, early 90s films, especially ones that get into Sundance or big film festivals in general, a lot of them sold and they got distribution, but weren't these smash successes. Like there's more even not even modern, because you look at something in the early 2000s like Napoleon Dynamite.
Right.
2000, that was a huge success.
That was huge.
And you're talking about like an actual critical success, but also a commercial success.
Right.
And you're right. I think some of these films didn't quite have that. Although there's all those films that you just mentioned are all good films.
For sure.
By phenomenally talented directors.
And it almost feels like it's, definitely made for film buffs type of thing, but maybe not good, not on the right wavelength to hit with the major markets.
I think if you're, and that's an interesting way to say it, because I think if you're talking film buffs, I mean, there's really no bigger film buff than Tarantino.
Absolutely.
He's not just a director. He's a huge film buff.
Right.
Like I consider myself a film buff, like a movie enthusiast. And then he's at this whole other, beyond being a great director, like he's also at a whole nother tier.
Well, I mean, he's such a film buff, and I'll just get this out of the way, that he basically ripped this movie off.
Yeah, it's borrowing, I think, from a couple concepts.
Sure. But there's one in particular, kind of an obscure Hong Kong film called City on Fire.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, the best form of flattery is imitation.
Absolutely.
So if he's looking at these films, a lot of these kung fu films in China or in Japan and all the Asian markets were making these films, or other types of films that he loved, like the spaghetti westerns or Italian horror films, like that's a huge... I mean, I think every director has to borrow from somewhere, especially when it's your first film. And I'm not defending it. I think, and I'm not also not saying he shouldn't have. I think it's fine, because I think that you have to. I think there's something you have to lean on in order to kind of find what your ultimate voice is. So if this is his first film, and we'll get into this, but as he's borrowing from these other films that he loves, he's doing it out of pure admiration.
Well, and I'm sure he'd say they're kind of homages, but I mean, basically, the major plot points towards the end were basically lifted directly from City on Fire, like from getting shot in the stomach, and then immediately murdering the assailant to the standoff at the end, and we'll obviously get into it, but those are basically straight up lifted from. But with that said, it's done very well, and I just had to get that out of the way.
He still gets his Tarantino spunk on it.
Yeah. Yes, he does. It's definitely
Do you know
his
what I mean?
style,
He's
for
still,
sure.
even if he's relying heavily on these other films and borrowing structurally and really character and otherwise from these other films, he's still putting his little thing onto it, whatever that term. So immediately we go, this guy can make movies.
For sure.
And I think it comes out of that. It's contrary in some ways, and we'll get into ratings and what we really think about, but it's contrary to something like we talked about last week with Who's That Knocking at My Door, where we thought, look, Scorsese's not hitting it out of the park. I think if you were to look at Tarantino's in this film, he kind of it's a far cry from Who's That Knocking at My Door. You watch the film and go, this is entertaining. I'm enjoying what I'm watching. I'm interested in the characters. I understand the concept of what's going on. And we'll get into that, because I don't know that there are elements to it that are over stylized, in the sense of like it's almost more style than substance.
Yes.
There's not a whole lot of depth to the characters necessarily. It's a lot of pizzazz.
For sure.
But that's kind of what a lot of his films are, and that's what ultimately I think kind of makes them fun. And so I think he's, in this film, we're getting that early on, right?
For sure. Yeah, he's definitely, he's a style guy. He's all about style, and he wants everything to look cool and sound cool, and he's very, very good at, it's a little over the top at times, but it plays well for the most part in everything he does.
So if we jump into this movie from the very beginning, I mean, it's a group of criminals, essentially, at a cafe, and it's them just shooting the shit.
Yeah. I mean, he comes out very Tarantino right from the get-go with all dialogue.
All dialogue. Heavy dialogue.
But it's entertaining, and this is the thing. Like, I'm not necessarily a Tarantino fan, but when I watch his movies, and I haven't seen everything he's done, but the things I have seen, I actually enjoy them. So I don't know if it's more about me just not liking the principle of it, or me not liking really kind of him. He kind of rubs me the wrong way sometimes. But I always kind of I solidify this thing. I don't really like Tarantino, but everything I see, I actually really enjoy watching.
Right.
So I don't know where that comes from.
If you're talking about what, it's fun to, look at our culture today. We're doing it right now, which is like, we're just talking.
Yeah,
we're shooting the shit about a movie. And what I love about his films, and particularly in Reservoir Dogs, right out the gate, like we mentioned, is even though it's dialogue intensive, the dialogue's funny.
Yeah.
The dialogue's entertaining. And so, and it's also conversational. So it doesn't feel like they're pushing an agenda or like trying to hit a particular line. It just feels like a bunch of dudes shooting the shit, and in a funny way. I mean, they're talking about Madonna, and they're talking about.
And I actually like their theory of what like a virgin means. I actually kind of like that.
Yeah.
But it's also
we'll explain it to the audience so that they get it.
So basically,
for those that might not know.
So what was it? Mr. Brown, who is played by Tarantino himself, has this theory that like a virgin is about a woman having sex with someone who has a really, really big dick.
A large penis.
Exactly. And it feels like the very first time. Hence the lyrics. And it's actually, it might actually have some weight there. Who knows?
There may be some truth to it. You never. But it's funny. The dialogue's funny. And that opening scene, it's shot in this kind of rotating circular pattern, going back and forth, just kind of conveying all the characters. You're getting a sense of who's there. And it really kind of establishes like the dynamic between them in the sense that they're, the who's who, in the sense of like, one thing that stands out to me is that in Steve Buscemi, his character is Mr. Pink. And it goes from talking about dicks and like a virgin, the Madonna song, to talking about tipping waitresses.
Right. And that's the interesting thing about not just this scene of dialogue, but a lot of Tarantino's dialogue scenes. It's not really servicing the characters. It's not done in order to get an idea of who these people are, except for Mr. Pink with the tipping. You're kind of getting a sense of who this guy is.
Yeah.
Other than that, I'm not understanding anything more about these guys.
Yeah. The example would be Mr. Brown talking about Madonna is funny, but there's no real undertone to his character per se.
Right.
Whereas Mr. Pink, because he talks about tipping as a cultural thing that's miscued, that's kind of stupid and doesn't make sense. And because society tells me to tip, I don't need to tip. Why are they mandating that I tip waitresses? Right. Why aren't we tipping everybody? Like someone at McDonald's.
Right.
Because they're giving us food too. But we're deciding to tip. And you get into this guy, okay, he's all about a contrary approach to everything.
Not only that, but it services his character later on when there's a lot of emotion going on. And he keeps saying, I'm the only one acting professional here. You get the sense that he can separate himself from all the emotion. Like they're saying, these people work, they're kind of, tugging at the heartstrings. These people work their ass off and you got to tip them. But he's like, no, I'm just looking at this logically and this is how I feel.
Very true.
And he does the tiniest violin thing. And it's like, he's not going to be swayed by being overly emotional about one thing or the other.
Right. No, that's true. And so you get a sense into his character later, and that plays into some
That's why he's my favorite character in this whole
Mr.
thing.
Pink?
Yeah, Mr. Pink.
Well, Steve Buscemi, I mean, that's a whole sidebar conversation there. Great actor. Like,
oh, he's great.
He's always intriguing to watch.
No matter
what. He looks silly, but
I know.
That's not a knock on him. I just think, well, it is, I guess.
He's the highlight of any Adam Sandler movie. Let's face it.
But he's hilarious.
Yeah, exactly. Because most Adam Sandler movies kind of suck, but he's great.
Yeah.
No matter what, he's great.
He is funny. He's also he's a great actor. You look at something like Boardwalk Empire, some of the more serious things that he's done beyond the Adam Sandler stuff, even, and he's phenomenal. So Steve Buscemi, the other people involved in this, of course, other actors. We got Harvey Keitel, Tim Roth, and Michael Madsen. Chris Penn. I mean, the list is pretty. That core group is pretty intense when it comes to performers. So for you to be able to single out that's your favorite character is impressive because that's a pretty good lineup.
There's a close second too.
Yeah, I got a feeling it's Mr. Blonde.
Yes, it's Mr. Blonde.
I think that most people look at this and there's something about Mr. Blonde that's cynical and dark and evil.
Well, plus I always kind of have an affinity for the villains in movies. Like I love horror movies. Like it's just my thing, and it's just there's something sadistic about him that's intriguing.
I think everybody does, whether they admit it or not. Like there's something intriguing, and I think partly it's because it's probably contrary to our own position.
I agree.
Do you know what I mean?
Yep, for sure.
There's something intriguing, and I think Michael Madsen, and we'll get into some of his stuff later, is phenomenal.
I mean, if you're Quentin Tarantino, and you're a movie buff, and this is your first feature. How lucky are you to get this lineup of actors?
So this is crazy, and I may miscue a few parts to the story. he's working at a video rental store, right? It's not Blockbuster. It's someone in LA, and I don't remember what it's called. Doesn't matter. But he's also writing, and he's aspiring director. He's thinking that him and Lawrence Bender, who's the producer of Reservoir Dogs, he thinks to himself, well, I'll have Lawrence act in it, and we'll have a couple characters, and we're gonna shoot this film that I wrote. They had somehow, I don't know how it was. The story goes that they had accrued about like $30,000 or $60,000, something to that effect, and they were just going to go shoot on 16 millimeter of film. And the film was Reservoir Dogs. It was a film that he wrote. I can't remember some connection that he had, but it ends up getting to Harvey Keitel somehow.
Okay.
I don't remember how.
Right.
But it gets to Keitel, and he reads it, and he goes, this is really good. I want to be in it.
No way. Can you imagine? Can
So
you imagine?
Now Tarantino's like, oh shit, Harvey Keitel wants
Harvey
to be in my
Keitel.
movie.
Oh my God.
And so he gets the you'll see it too in the credits. It comes up Harvey Keitel. It says co-producer.
Oh, cool.
And that's how it started, was that once Keitel attached, then of course
It's opening doors.
It opens huge doors. It's circulating and people are thinking. And so Keitel flies out on his own dime, Tarantino and Bender, to go to New York and do casting. And when they're in New York doing casting, I mean, this has to have been this would have been a fun documentary to watch.
I cannot
if you could have had someone following him through this process on his first movie as a director.
As a director and someone who aspires to do this kind of thing, that would just blow my mind.
I think if Harvey Keitel, because he's a film buff, as we know, so
Sure.
you're like, you probably shit your pants when Harvey Keitel comes and I'm serious. Like
Right,
he's like,
right.
What, he wants to be in the movie?
Right.
And he wants to co-produce?
Right.
So, I mean, anyway, yeah, it'd be fun to have been a fly on the wall or to have seen some documentary about that process, because he flies them to New York. And, of course, there's a great acting pool in New York and a lot of, great actors. And that circulates around. And so he gets to Tim Roth and Michael Madsen and Steve Buscemi, and they all love it and they want to be part of it.
Right.
So it just kind of this magical event of like taking it from a video rental associate, video store associate, to writing a script that kind of falls into the hands of Harvey Keitel that then he wants to help co-produce. And now you've lined up these phenomenal actors from New York to be in the movie.
Well, thank God for Tarantino, because if he would have just made this with a couple buddies and didn't have actors with those chops,
it would have been, who's that knocking at my door?
It would have been. Like, you cannot come out with your first scene is only dialogue, not even exposition, just dialogue. And if you don't have guys who can actually carry it and do it, disaster first scene. That's it.
Now, keep in mind, too, it's kind of funny that they were following last week's podcast with this one.
Right.
Because this also has non-linear storytelling.
Yes.
This also is, of course, a first-time director, which is a common theme for us. But also, it's a group of guys, and not, last week's wasn't just a group of guys, but it had a group of guys. And this is like that are talking and doing things that guys do. In this case, there's a little more heightened story and plot because they're dealing with their criminals that are going on.
There's an actual plot in
There's
this
a
one.
plot. There's
Yeah.
a plot. There's a plot for sure, and that's where he succeeds. But I think the point to that is like the contrast between the two is kind of interesting. Between Who's That Knocking My Door and not Pulp Fiction. What am I talking about? They all fucking blend together.
Yeah, I know, right?
But between Reservoir Dogs. So you get this great, you get this great cast, and at that point you can't lose.
Yeah.
I mean, if he had messed this up, I mean, we wouldn't know what we know about Tarantino today. We wouldn't see the films that we've seen.
I agree. I think the actors carry.
The actors, I mean, now I will say that his writing's fun and stylish.
Oh, absolutely.
So that does. Now, you need, like you're saying, you do need someone attached to that dialogue who makes it believable, because it could come off fake.
It feels
or over, you know what I mean, over the top. If someone's not delivering it and you're feeling that you believe in that person at what they're actually saying, and it just feels like a line, then that's different. So the actors do carry it, but it's also a nod to his writing style, which is fun.
For sure. I mean, as far as obviously the writing carries it and then the actors carry it. This whole thing kind of feels like a stage play to me because there are a lot of long takes. There's not many setups. There's not a whole lot of action and just a lot of dialogue.
That's interesting. I think that's probably a very, plausible take on it because the style in which it's set up, I think the big thing for me is there's not a whole lot of locations in the sense of like a lot of dynamic changes. I mean, they go to the warehouse or the meet point after the heist, but yeah, and it's just a lot of conversation between these characters.
Yeah.
And they're kind of slowly escalating the story as it goes forward. So I agree. I think it's actually got a lot of play-like or theatrical-like qualities to it, which I find. And to combat that, I mean, you go to a play or, everything's carried by the actors.
Exactly.
So
and the writing.
And the writing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you look at this, like it's still got stylistic things, but directorially in terms of coverage and where they're putting the camera. I mean, there's some cool shots and cool things that he does. Sure. Even the opening scene, like we mentioned, is cool because they're kind of working the table in a fun way. But you're right. I think heavily reliant on the writing and performed by real phenomenal actors.
For sure. I mean, there's a lot of one-take scenes in this. And I think the most complicated shot I saw was a Steadicam shot following Mr. Blonde outside to the car and then back into the warehouse.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's it. I tried to kind of pay attention to that. I didn't see anything more complicated than that.
So let's introduce the characters just a little bit and kind of go through like who's who. So they're at this table. You have Harvey Keitel. Harvey Keitel's Mr. White. You have Tim Roth, who's Mr. Orange. You have Michael Madsen, who's Mr. Blonde. Chris Penn.
He's so good.
He's so good in this movie.
So much fun.
If you think about Reservoir Dogs, you're thinking Keitel and Madsen and Buscemi and these guys and Roth.
Right.
You don't really think of Chris Penn.
No.
In the initial thought of the movie.
Right.
And then you see him in here and he's so good at it.
He's so good. He steals the show.
R.I.P. Chris Penn.
Yep.
Steve Buscemi is Mr. Pink. And then you have Lawrence Tierney, who's Joe Cabot, who's kind of the leader, the mafioso kind of character that's overseeing the big heist from you'd say like a Godfather or administrative perspective.
For sure.
So a lot of great actors. And then, of course, the last one you throw in there is Quentin Tarantino as Mr. Brown. So there's another, we don't see him. Mr. Blue dies,
Mr.
so
Blue,
we don't care about Mr. Blue.
He's in it for half a scene, I'll say.
No offense to Edward Bunker, but we don't care about Mr. Blue. He's irrelevant to the story.
No. I mean, how much dialogue does he even have in this?
Just, I think, an opening line at the cafe.
I think that's about it.
That says something, anyway.
Yeah.
He's out of there. So you have all these, and they're in there. And now, when they're in the cafe, like, nobody's met each other except for Nice Guy Eddie, played by Chris Penn, and, of course, Joe Cabot, who's his father. Mm-hmm. And then Mr. Blonde has some kind of association that we learn about later, and also Mr. White. But Nice Guy Eddie and Joe Cabot, they're father and son. And then there's some relationships to them. But the other characters, the Mr. Whites, the Mr. Orange, Pink, all them, they don't know each other.
Right.
They've never met.
Right.
And they don't call each other by their real names for anonymity. They're trying to stay secretive as they plan this heist to go rob a high-profile jewelry store.
And it's made known by Joe that you don't, for any circumstances, tell anyone anything about yourself.
Never divulge anything about your history and never divulge your true name.
Right.
Yeah. This becomes a sense of a plot point later on, too, between Mr. White and Mr. Orange. But, yeah, so these guys don't know each other, and they're prepping to go on this heist. It's interesting because it's not traditional. And what I mean by that is, like, if you think of a heist film, it always feels like everybody's cohesive and everyone's like a perfect team.
Ocean's 11 is what you think.
Yeah.
You think everything's planned out and it's super cool and we're all got our own thing we're doing and we know each other and we've worked a million jobs together.
Whereas here, it's not really like that. I mean, there's camaraderie in the silliness, but it doesn't feel like there's camaraderie, like in the same way you would think of an Ocean's film. And so I find it kind of interesting that that's the setup. You're just learning about these characters as they're learning about each other.
Right.
And I find that kind of an interesting setup to start the movie. In typical Tarantino fashion, after the cafe scene, it cuts to this exaggerated slow motion shot of the 8 of them walking down, And
it feels like the footage stutters. Like it feels like they didn't shoot it on the right frame rate.
Yeah, they didn't. It feels like they shot it at too low of a frame rate.
Right.
It was like 16 frames per second or something.
Hey man, it was his first day. He's never done this before.
That's when you got to rely on your DP.
Exactly.
You got to ask the DP. I want this to be in slow motion. What's an ideal frame rate?
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, okay, 120 or whatever the number is.
Right.
So, but that shot, and then we hear the music in typical Tarantino fashion, that real kind of the 70s kind of vibe music, and then the title comes in, and then we move on in the storyline. We basically start to, it cuts to this real abrupt scene, right? Which is Mr. Orange in the backseat of a car, bloody and bleeding and dying.
And it's basically Tim Roth desperately trying to keep an American accent as he's panicking in the backseat.
I've thought about that. And what's funny is in the roll credits at the end, I saw a crew member. It said dialect coach.
Not only that, but we're jumping ahead a little bit. The chick, the woman who shot him was his dialect coach.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
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 Well, we'll get into that story.
Amazon Prime gave me that little tidbit.
X-ray.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, X-ray working double this movie. But yeah, Tim Roth, he's a great actor.
For sure.
And that scene, even with the holding in of the British accent, still really good. It feels really believable.
It's scary. It's scary.
He's like, this is a man who's dying.
Yeah.
And it feels real. He's really good at it. Now, the two people in the car, you have Mr. Orange in the back dying, and you have Mr. White in the front driving. And they're obviously, the setup to this is that something's gone wrong at the heist that they had planned.
Right.
We don't know any details. We don't understand any other kind of dynamics to it, but something went wrong because now this man's nearly dead or dying.
Well, and I love that cut from the cool shot of them walking like we're all one crew to immediately something's wrong.
Yeah.
Like immediately it went to shit.
It did not go. It kind of went the way they planned it, which was they didn't.
Right. Exactly.
Or it felt like they
didn't. Exactly.
It revolted or it revered back to the idea that Madonna like a virgin, and like there was no preparation. They were just talking shit.
They're
and
just
then
having
all
a
of
good
sudden,
time. They're going to waltz in there. They're going to take these diamonds. No problem.
We get a little later where they did put a little bit of research in, but yeah, it's a cool contrast to see like happy-go-lucky, ready to go do this heist.
Right.
This group of 8 people were ready to rock and roll to complete disaster.
Total disaster. Yep.
And they're having this conversation, Mr. White and Mr. Orange, in the car. And I can't remember. You have to remind me. When does Mr. White? He's already revealed his real name to Mr. Orange. Because Mr. Orange is yelling out Larry, isn't he?
I think so. I think so. I know he's already revealed that he is a Brewers fan. They've already talked that he's a Milwaukee Brewers fan.
Yeah.
I think he might tell them in the car. I cannot remember. But
somehow there's been a stronger rapport between Mr. White and Mr. Orange, and Mr. White, played by Harvey Keitel, has divulged the information that Joe told him to never divulge,
right?
Which is where you're from and what your name is.
Right.
This has been, and you kind of think, well, it doesn't matter because Mr. Orange is going to die anyway.
Right.
So even if he did divulge that information, well, he's as good as gone.
Yep.
So it doesn't matter.
Yep.
And they go to a safe house, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
The meeting point. So at least they did that planning.
Yeah.
At least they planned it when things go awry or maybe that was just the final destination anyway. Mm-hmm. But they arrive there, nobody else is there. And it's all kind of chaotic. You're hearing them talk and what went wrong and what's going on and then Buscemi, Mr. Pink, shows up to the warehouse.
Yep.
And it's interesting because his character is immediately skeptical of everybody.
Yes, because this is why I love him, because
In terms of being someone being a rat.
Exactly.
Didn't go right. Someone
he knows
ratted
immediately.
on us.
Yeah, and Mr. White doesn't quite understand. He hasn't pieced it together yet because it's just been chaos. But Mr. Pink is an absolute professional. He looks at things logically, and this goes back to the whole tipping thing. He doesn't get caught up in the emotion. He looks at things logically, and he knows that there's a rat, that something went wrong. The cops showed up way too fast, and he knows.
So, because Mr. White, to me, I'm curious. He's been doing this a long time. He's been a criminal for a long time. It's not well noted, but you gather that immediately. And I don't like. He feels naive to it, or is it just him being more sympathetic and sensitive to a dying man? Because I feel like he should also be a little bit standoffish to believe that anybody in the crew at all. Like Mr. Pink is essentially just not going to believe anybody.
Right.
Mr. White is like, I have a dying man here. We need to get him to a doctor.
Right. Mr. White is definitely more empathetic to other people.
Why do you care? My curiosity about the character is like, why does he care? What is it about? To be honest, like if you're a full blown criminal, the heist went to shit.
Right.
You get to the safe house, and one man's been shot, and you're bringing him in and talking about getting a doctor, and you don't take him to the hospital, so at least you have that idea of like, I'm not going to throw him into that situation. But like, what makes his character care?
And I think that's just him. And I have a little bit of a problem because there's a little bit of inconsistency with his character. But we know that for some reason he's got a real liking for Mr. Orange. Mr. Orange, right? Tim Roth?
Yeah.
Okay. He's got a real liking for him. He's bonded with him for some reason. But he also doesn't like Mr. Blonde because Mr. Blonde was just recklessly killing people.
Right. So at the heist, it's revealed when Mr. Blonde comes in later that he was fucking crazy.
Right. And he even says, how old was that girl? 19, 20, something like that. So he obviously doesn't agree with the killing. But later on, he even says they're kind of staking the place out. And Mr. Orange is asking him, what if they don't give you the money? Then he's like, you cut off his finger.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of inconsistency there because I want to believe that Mr. White is full blown, like he's empathetic. He's quick to bond with people. Like he was having a good time in that cafe, enjoying the company. He's that kind of person.
Right. He even dives in on Mr. Pink about how waitresses are hardworking people.
Exactly.
And you need to tip them.
Exactly.
And so you get that empathy or sympathy early on.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why it's a little inconsistent when he's saying you cut off the pinky and then you threaten to cut off the thumb. It seems cruel for what we know from his character.
Right. So in the safe house at this point, it's Mr. White, Mr. Orange, and we've got Mr. Pink. Right, he comes later. And so the three of them are trying to, it's this confusion. Mm-hmm. Even for the viewer, you understand conceptually what's going on, which is it went wrong, but you're trying to figure out where this is going next in the story and who did what and where they're going and where are the other guys at. Right. You're constantly kind of questioning yourself like, well, there was 8 of them total, including Joe. Where is everybody now? It's revealed that Mr. Blue, who we didn't care about in the beginning anyway, because he's been killed by the cops.
Right.
And obviously there was not just a heist gone wrong, but a large mass shootout.
And this is, I also like the way this whole scene was handled because it's exposition. It totally is, but it's not forced. Like you're living in the moment with them. You're trying to figure out what the hell happened while they're trying to figure out what happened.
Yeah, there's a curiosity.
Yeah, but you're still getting all the information, but just not. It's like that mystery box. You're not getting it all, but you're getting some piece by piece.
This is where I attribute like a good sense of plot structure into Tarantino's writing. And like you said, it is a mystery box. And anytime you can keep that mystery box closed off for however long it can be, without getting to a point where the audience goes, I don't give a shit anymore.
Right.
It's a delicate balance, but I think he does it really well because you're constantly going, well, what happened?
Right.
Like why is this guy not here?
Where's the rest of them?
Where's the rest of them?
We don't even know who's who at this point. They're saying a lot of names and we don't know which character's which
character.
And
that's the other interesting thing about it is like nobody's got a real you're kind of observatory in your viewing pattern because nobody's a real person.
Right.
Everybody's someone else.
Right.
and you're not really sure who's who. Do you know what I mean? And so it's not that you're not attached to what's happening in the story, but none of the characters are really, you don't love, I mean, they're criminals, but you don't love any of them, or like in the sense of like, if he dies, he dies. That's how I feel. And we'll get into that at the end too, because that's kind of foreshadowing a little bit about how I feel about the overall concept of the movie.
Well, and there was a part here, though, that made me very intrigued, and that's when they talk about Mr. Blonde being a psychopath.
Yeah.
And this is when Mr. White's like, you never work with a psychopath. You see him just shoot those people, and then I'm thinking, who the hell's Mr. Blonde?
Yeah, the curiosity is there. It's sparked.
It's like, I got to know who Mr. Blonde is.
Yeah, because you're not really sure.
Right.
I think when they do the cafe, he does have something, but I don't know that they ever introduce his character as Mr. Blonde. So you're immediately going, okay, well, which one's which?
Right.
And that's what you're trying to figure out. As it goes on, I mean, at this point, Mr. Orange is in and out of consciousness, and he kind of just Mr. White, who's Harvey Keitel, and Mr. Pink, Stevie Buscemi, kind of go into another room, and they're trying to figure out what to do with him. Essentially, are we going to get a doctor? Who's going to be here? Mr. Pink, like you mentioned, is very professional and logical in the sense of like, let him die, it doesn't matter.
Right.
And Mr. White's like, we got to save him, and he takes a personal responsibility because he feels as though it was his fault that Mr. Orange got shot. They go to this back room, and they're discussing the next steps and what's what and who's who. They come back in, and Mr. Orange is basically unconscious.
Yep.
Or pretending to be.
Oh, that could be. I didn't even think about that.
And we'll get into that later on.
Think about that. And then, and this is a part where you see Mr. Pink a little worried. He's like, is he dead? He's like, oh, Jesus, I thought he died on us.
Yeah, and that gives his a little bit of insight into his character, even though he's more logical and professional. Like, he still doesn't want the team to die.
Exactly. And I wonder maybe if it was more because that's going to cause us more problems later on.
Could be that, too.
Yeah.
But he's not in the same arena as Mr. Blonde or as Mr. Blonde. I mean, in terms of Mr. Blonde.
Oh, not giving a shit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So they're sitting there. They start arguing, and I love how this transpired. This is a great technique, both from a filmmaking perspective and also just from an anticipation perspective, because Mr. White and Mr. Pink start getting into it. Like Harvey Keitel and Steve Buscemi. It's this great scene where they're kind of just going back and forth with each other. It's so good. It's intense. Neither of them are seeing eye to eye.
Right.
And it's just this thing. And they start literally physically getting to a point where Mr. White kind of he gets the upper hand and kind of beats the shit out of Mr. Pink a little bit, kicking him and stuff.
And they pull their guns, right?
And then Mr. Pink flips around and pulls his gun. He's like, you want to fuck with me?
Right.
And then they both pull their guns. He's like, you don't want to, so it's this real dynamic. And this whole time, the camera's just pulling back.
And it's just letting actors do what they do, letting great actors do what they do.
Exactly. And also, if you think about that technically, a lot of times, you think about filmmaking, it's like the closer you get, the more intimate it becomes. Right? So like the concept being in the structure of film grammar is like, hey, if I'm in tight on a close-up, I'm in that person's, I'm feeling that person. As I get away, I'm not feeling it as much. And I love that he plays the contrary technical approach, which is like, you would think as someone's fighting, you would be in there tight and it'd be like really close up. And like you mentioned, you let good actors do their thing. And you start wondering, why is this such a slow pullback?
Right.
Why? Because you're getting farther and farther from the action and the intimacy of this real dynamic scene.
They feel smaller and smaller in that big, huge room, too.
Yeah.
Right.
Feel smaller and smaller. And it's just a long pullback.
Right.
And then finally you see this kind of side profile with a little soda cup.
It's so cool.
And it's revealed that it's Mr. Blonde.
He's just
Michael Madsen.
He's just sitting there watching.
And then he has this line.
You kids shouldn't play so rough. Somebody's going to start crying.
That's what it was. You kids shouldn't play so rough. Somebody's going to start crying. I just think it's so funny because the casual nature in which he's standing there and the line that he delivers while two dudes are pointing guns at each other.
Right.
He's not even flinching in any sense. There's no urgency to what he's trying to stop them.
And this is where you really kind of start to get the psychopath vibes.
Immediately, because two guys with guns on your team, you don't want more dead bodies necessarily, even if it's, he's just casual.
Doesn't matter. He's been sitting there watching it.
He's watching it.
He didn't just walk in. He's been watching it the whole time.
He's been there for the whole thing. So this camera pulls back and reveals that, and I just love that line, and it really brings us into that character. And
while Mr. White and Mr. Pink are fighting, I'm going to keep reiterating this. Mr. Pink says something to the effect like, "I'm acting like a professional. You're not. Like you need to be more suspect of everybody. I'm the one acting like a professional here."
Right.
And this is just an ongoing theme.
And it's even, if you think about it, like you kind of go, well, man, maybe Mr. White should have just listened to Mr. Pink the whole time.
Right.
You find out later, right?
Right.
So yeah, he's saying, I'm more professional. Then it pulls back. We're introduced to Mr. Blonde. We know who he is. We also know that he was responsible for the shootout. Because, like you mentioned, the exposition, right? So we know that he's the psychotic one, not only from this really casual scene of serious thing going on and him just observing comically, but also like we get the exposition that he's the one that shot out the jewelers, and was just killing like random citizens and cops,
just killing everybody
he could. So we get this introduction into Mr. Blonde. Now we kind of know. We have Mr. Orange, Mr. Pink, Mr. White, Mr. Blonde. Okay, we're getting everybody, and we're starting to be able to identify who's who.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's these conversations between Mr. Blonde and Mr. White. They start getting into it a little bit. They start wanting, like Mr. White kind of steps up to him and calls him a psycho.
For sure.
More or less.
Right.
And then he kind of, Mr. Blonde calls him out. He says, look, you can call me whatever you want. Are you gonna bark all day or are you gonna bite?
Right.
Like, let's make fucking something of it.
And he just says it in the calmest way, too.
In the most casual way. And
I think at this point, Mr. White still has his gun out, right?
He still has his gun out. And also... And then Mr. Blonde just throws his soda. He just like throws his soda.
Let's go.
We're done. And so anyway, they're all trying to figure shit out. So the confusion is amongst the characters. There's really no complete trust among any of them.
Right.
But they're all trying to ask questions about who did it, who ratted us out. And the whole time Mr. Pink's going, someone ratted us out. And Mr. White's like, it just, things happen or whatever it is. But they're all trying to figure it out, waiting for Nice Guy Eddie, played by Chris Penn, and Joe Cabot to come and, basically kind of resolve the issue.
Right.
But in the meantime, it's also discovered that that Mr. Pink had actually preserved getting the diamonds.
He got him.
Even though...
Because he's a fucking professional, man.
He's the pro.
He's a professional.
This is why Alan loves his character.
Because he had the presence of mind when shit was going down, and you see him running down the street. There was... Actually, when it cut back to him and he's running down the street, and he's got the briefcase, he drops it when he gets in the car, and you never see him pick it back up. So I thought he lost the diamonds.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
But he says that he got them. So because he's a professional. He's a pro. He knows what he's doing. He's not going to let emotions get to him. He's not going to let a few bullets stop him from getting the score.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's revealed that he gets them. And then a few minutes later, Nice Guy Eddie shows up. Nice Guy, and I'm not blazing through it, but I'm going through it a little quicker. He comes in and they're all talking about where's Joe? What Joe's the leader, the Godfather. He's coming, he's on his way, he's pissed off. And then there's this little bit of an altercation as they're trying to figure out between Nice Guy Eddie, Mr. White, Mr. Pink, Mr. Orange. Not Mr. Orange, I'm sorry. There's this little altercation there with Nice Guy Eddie. And Nice Guy Eddie, this performance, by the way, we talk about Chris Penn.
So good.
It's so good.
It's so good.
I was looking at it too. He is only, let's see, now Chris Penn died in like 2005 or 2006.
Mm-hmm.
He was only like 40 years old. So he's pretty young. So that means this came out in 92. That means in this performance, he's only like 24.
Man, he looks older than that.
23? Like he's not old.
Right.
But he's so good in it. And by the way, for those listening, Chris Penn is actor Sean Penn's brother.
And he looks a lot like him. He looks like just a fat version of Sean Penn.
He looks like a fat version of Sean Penn. Exactly. Nice guy Eddie. Mr. Pink says, I got the diamonds. I stashed them. I didn't bring them with me because I wasn't even sure if this was a safe house.
Right.
That's how much he's forward thinking in his professionalism.
Smart guy. And also the whole time he's like, we got to get out of here. Cops are going to be here. We don't know who's been captured. We don't know. The only thing that anyone can really give the cops is this location.
Right.
And we got to leave. Like he's smart, man. He's smart.
He's on top of the whole thing.
He's quirky, but he's smart and he's got it.
He says, okay, I got him. And so nice guy Eddie says, look, Mr. Blonde, you're going to stay here with Mr. Orange, who's unconscious, dying, shot on the floor. He's bloody and bleeding. And Mr. White and Mr. Pink, you're going to come with me. We're going to go get the diamonds. So Mr. Blonde, Michael Madsen, you're in charge of whatever's happening.
Right.
Now, one thing I've totally skipped over, which is absolutely crucial, is before Nice Guy Eddie comes, after Mr. Blonde is introduced, he says, come with me outside.
And this is after they've calmed down. They're not fighting anymore.
They're not fighting anymore. And he says, you want to see this?
I got something for you.
I got something for you guys.
You're gonna
come
like
outside with me. You're going to enjoy this. And he goes outside and opens his trunk to his car, and there's a cop tied up.
And they all smile.
And they all smile. They all love it.
Yeah.
They do. And they bring him in, and then their reasoning is that we'll tie this guy up, this cop, and we'll beat him to shit and torture him in any way we can, so maybe he'll divulge how the cops knew.
Right.
Like, how did they cops get there so fast? How did they know that we were there? Whatever it might have been, we got ratted out. So they tie this cop up, and then our nice guy Eddie comes and does the whole thing we talked about. But then Mr. Pink and Mr. White, they leave with nice guy Eddie, and it's Mr. Blonde, the cop, and Mr. Orange.
And Mr. Orange, who is unconscious,
lying on the floor.
Allegedly,
because we'll get into that towards the end. I'm not sure entirely. And Mr. Blonde's in charge. That's a bad thing for that cop.
And you feel it. As soon as they leave, you feel it. Like, you just feel like this is going to get really bad.
His Michael Madsen's so good, and it's just in how the impression and the physicality of how when he says you're in charge, he starts to go, okay.
Gets a little swagger going.
Yeah, he gets a little swag.
Yeah.
They leave, and before it gets into anything too crazy, you already know that this cop's in for it.
Yeah.
It's not going to be a good situation for this cop. And essentially, it's this really now famously put together torture scene.
Right.
And the cop's tied up, and Madsen's walking around doing a little dance. Turns on the radio, you know.
And then he pulls out the blade.
When
he pulls out that blade and he starts like fake shaving himself, I'm just like, holy shit, just get it over with. Yeah. I've seen this movie before. I know what's going to happen, but just get it over with.
But you still feel that anxiety.
Yes.
Even having seen the movie a few times. And then he takes the blade out and he's dancing to the music, he's just playing it so well. It's just so iconic. It's so iconic in the sense that it's funny because, like, I was thinking about this when I was watching the scene. Last year, I edited a feature film, and the feature film's dark comedy, and it's about military Marines in the field in Afghanistan or Middle East, and in the middle of war, they get a prisoner of war. Essentially, it's this terrorist. And they put him in a tent. And the whole scene as I was cutting it, this is while I was editing it, I was like, and what they do in the scene is the Marine is crazy.
Right.
He's delusional and just psychotic, essentially. And it's a reimagining or a replication in some ways of this scene. And he cuts the ear off. And the whole time I was editing, I'm like, it's funny because Tarantino homages everybody in Reservoir Dogs.
Right.
And in this little independent film, they're totally homaging
right.
Reservoir Dogs.
Do they do the same thing where the camera pans away?
100%, almost the exact same way. He cuts an ear off, except for, and he looks at it. He has an ear in his hand, and I'm like, yeah, that's totally Reservoir Dogs.
In this, they shot this two ways too. They shot it with actually showing him cut the ear off,
right?
And that didn't play as well as panning away and not showing it. And this is kind of like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, my favorite movie of all time, when the girl gets hung on a hook. You don't see it.
Right.
But you are convinced you've seen it because it's so disturbing.
Yeah, sometimes not seeing the action, but feeling the implication is stronger.
Definitely. This
is a pan away, so it pans away and it just sits against the wall while you hear a little bit of what's happening.
Yep.
That build to me, yeah, I mean, I think it plays, in this particular scene, it plays much stronger. I think a lot of times as a filmmaker, you might want to go, I really want to, in Tarantino especially, you would think that would be something in terms of the high violence and the blood and the grotesque.
Well, plus,
you'd want to see the ear cut off.
As a filmmaker, it'd just be fun to do a little bit of gore effects, like that'd be fun to do.
Right.
But I think they did, but it just didn't play as well. It wasn't as powerful.
And I wonder too, this is also in that, I mean, you have choices there. So in the edit, if you have the set of coverage that actually shows it, and then you have the shot that actually pans off and you just kind of hear it. I mean, this is another thing, and we talked about this last week. You look at the editing. It's interesting to me because you have these real renowned directors. You have Tarantino in this case. Last week you had Scorsese. The editing, and that's a choice.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you have the option to show it potentially. It sounds like they shot it a couple ways, multiple ways, or not to. And editorially, you're deciding it plays so much better by just the impression of it.
Which is interesting because if you go like to Inglourious Bastards, and when they're cutting the swastika in the guy's head, like they show it in full.
It's there.
It's clear. Like it's not implied at all. So I don't know if it's just a situational thing or if he's just gone back on that.
I'll go like another nod to a great editor, which is Sally Menke, who up until her death edited all of Tarantino's films. I can't remember which one it's through, but the first four, I think she edited. And great editor.
Yeah.
With a real kind of sad story. She goes hiking in a canyon up in Los Angeles, has a heart attack.
Jeez. Is that how she died?
First off, phenomenal editor. She goes hiking right up in the canyon near Los Angeles. She doesn't come home. So everyone gets worried about her, of course, like friends and family. And then her body is found at the bottom of a ravine.
Oh, my God.
Her dog, who was with her, is alive, sitting next to her body.
Oh, my God.
And they had later determined that her death was heat-related.
Oh, you got to be kidding me.
So it wasn't, what it was. The day she went hiking, it was one of the hottest days in Los Angeles. It was like 110 degrees. And you get into the valley, some of those areas get real hot.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway.
What year was that?
I was 2010.
Okay.
Yeah, so she wouldn't have cut Inglourious Bastards.
Let's see. No, she would have.
Her last film would have been.
Oh, no. Inglourious Bastards was 2009.
Oh, so did she cut that
She
one?
may have, yeah. She may have.
But real kind of sad story, and I find it kind of interesting that all these really prominent, because I think that's not all of them. Most directors, once they find that relationship with an editor,
and you can understand why.
They stick with them most of the time.
For sure.
But I always find it interesting too, like in cases of these these are top high-profile directors in film history. You got Scorsese, Tarantino. We could probably throw others in there. They're all female editors.
That's interesting. I
always find that interesting. And there's a bit by somebody, I can't remember the comedian's name, and he talks about how they're all women editors because they got to clean up the man's mess.
Not untrue.
They got to clean up that mess, the man's mess.
Good at dealing with egos too, probably.
Yeah, probably good diplomats. right? In terms of working a room.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, Sally Menke edited the film, and I think that's it. I'm not attributing that particular scene to her, or you know what I mean. But like, there's a choice there, and they went with the right one because it builds that the cringe worthiness of like they cut the ears cut off.
And then when he's playing with it,
then when he cuts and he's doing the little whisper,
it's so gross. and then it just gets worse because, and this is the only technical, at least as far as I can remember, the only technical shot I can remember in the film is the Steadicam shot following Mr. Blonde outside. And he says, "Stay put," and he goes outside to the trunk, and it's. I like that they used this Steadicam shot here because I don't. What the hell is he gonna do now? Like I just think I saw the worst I could possibly see, and he goes out. He opens the trunk. He gets out a can of gasoline.
That single shot, just going out the door, opening the trunk, pulls it out, comes back. And when he gets that can of gas, you go, okay, the ear was bad.
Right.
But you're going to burn somebody?
Burn him alive. Well, plus the way the music, because there's no score in this movie. All the music is just like radio music.
Yeah, it's kind of, it almost plays diegetic, and it's like it's taking place in the scene, in the environment, in the atmosphere.
But now that song, Stuck in the Middle with You, that song is burned into my mind as a horrible thing. And it's just from this one scene. Now he goes outside, the music stops.
Yeah.
And you feel a little safe, but you come back in and the music's playing still.
And where it picks up, too, because it's
right.
And
Exactly.
You're like, oh, my gosh, this dude is crazy.
And then you can just feel the burn of that gasoline on that severed ear and the fear.
He waterboards the dude.
He waterboards him with gasoline.
It's what it feels, because he's throwing it in his mouth.
Exactly. And the tape's coming off like he's just drenched in it.
It's a great. What Tarantino's good at is building such suspense and anxiety.
Right.
Because at that point you start. I mean, of course you're feeling for the police officer, and you're also in a movie situation highly intrigued by the craziness of this character.
Right.
I kind of compare. This is how I kind of look at it. Like his Mr. Blonde, of course, I think he's the most intriguing character of the film, in terms of, like we talked about, he's the villain more so than the others. But there's a weird kind of attachment that we like about that. It's like, I always think of it this way: like my wife loves the serial killer books and TV shows.
My girlfriend does too. Loves them. I do too, actually.
Yeah, my wife's like the sweetest person in the world.
Right.
But she loves those.
There's a dark part of us. So much.
So my point is, Mr. Blonde we love because in most ways, almost always really, we can't relate to him.
Well, he even explains that he doesn't care about any information he's going to get. He says to the cop, he said, "I just enjoy killing people."
He's a serial killer.
I just enjoy seeing them in pain.
So because of that fact, there's an intrigue about him.
And then, but it also gets a little, you kind of feel for him when you see his backstory, when it flashes back to his backstory, and he's just out of jail and he's with Joe and nice guy Eddie, and they're like family, and you actually feel for this guy. It's like he just did a long stint in jail and he's got nothing, and it's kind of heartwarming in a twisted, messed up way that this family is going to take care of him, even though it's so corrupt and terrible, but they're going to take care of him.
So that's interesting, because one thing we forgot to mention was that one of the things is, as everybody's coming into the safe house and starting to meet up, what we do with the nonlinear editing style in terms of the story is we flash back to characters, and we're getting intertitles that says Mr. White. And then it shows Harvey Keitel's exposition, his history.
Right.
And then it's like Mr. Blonde. And we're seeing the inner title pop up, the title card, that's leading us into the exposition.
Right.
So the one with Mr. Blonde, you get a sense of, you know what it is more than anything? I don't sympathize with him. I still think he's a dick. And I don't like him in terms of, I do as a character, but as a person, he's horrible.
Sure.
But one thing I do like about his character is in that scene where it cuts back to nice guy Eddie and Joe, and you see the family tie and the relationship, and like the camaraderie and the kind of silliness that happens, is that there's and later it's revealed he's got a huge amount of loyalty.
Yes.
Because the concept was that we find out he was in prison for like 4 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he had a chance to throw nice guy Eddie and the family, Joe, under the bus.
Yep.
And he didn't.
He didn't do it. He didn't say a word.
So there's a loyalty, like honor among thieves,
Right.
that he has. And
Which is strange for a psychopath.
that's what I mean. It's a kind of contrary almost position, but maybe he's playing into that. I don't know. We should have my wife on because then she can talk about serial killer psychology.
Right.
But something like Ted Bundy, I mean, because Mr. Blonde literally is a serial killer.
Right.
Because he just killed however many people, half a dozen people.
And he enjoyed it.
And he loved it.
Right.
And I get the sense whether or not he was convicted of it, it wasn't his first time.
Well, not only did he love it, he's the only one who shows up at the safe house, not a disheveled mess. And not only that, he's got a soda. They asked him, like, where are your French fries? He said, I ate them on the way.
which always had me curious. Like, that is kind of an interesting, and now that when you think about it that way, it plays into his character quite well.
Right.
But when you first watch it, you go, how the shit does this guy have a soda in his hand?
Right,
After
right.
a heist.
He went and
gone
stopped
wrong.
and got a soda.
That's what I mean.
Right,
Like,
exactly.
He just drove through the fucking drive-thru
Right.
and got a soda.
Exactly.
And now that we're starting to dissect it in the way that we are, you go, that plays into his character.
Totally.
Because that's just the normal thing. I killed however many people. I'm just going to get a burger and fries.
It's nothing. It's nothing to him. And that's why it's so scary when he starts dumping gasoline on the cop.
Yes.
And he gets the lighter out.
Once that and the cops going off about and you start to sympathize, of course, but he's like talking about, I got a kid and I got a family.
Like, and I don't know anything.
I have no idea.
I've only been on the force 9 months. I don't know anything. I can't tell you anything.
A good performance too, because he feels it feels like he is a green cop.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean?
Yep.
Like, he plays into that well. And then Mr. Blonde, Madsen, he lights that thing and you go, oh shit.
Oh God, here we go.
I don't want to see this.
Exactly.
This is torturous to watch. For me, it's like dark and I don't want to watch this anymore. I'm dead. Like, it's like, if they're going to do the light, the fire on, I'm big documentary. I love watching documentaries.
Mm-hmm.
Do you love docs?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. There's this one, I mean, and as kind of structural as they are, and kind of like Ken Burns' documentaries are just so well built.
Yep.
There's this one on the Vietnam War.
Oh, no. I know what you're talking about.
Where the monks set themselves on fire.
I won't watch that. I won't watch that.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Though? So
that's just misery porn. That's just like
I couldn't watch it.
Yeah, I can't watch that stuff.
It was hard, and so my point being, I was like, I don't know if I can. And I don't have a huge filter. I mean, there's things I don't want to watch.
Sure.
But it's like, okay, it's a movie, and I can contextualize it that way.
Right.
But I was like, literally, when the first time, I've seen the movie a few times.
Right.
But the first time, I can't do it.
I can't do this.
And then there's a twist and a vindication in some ways.
Absolutely.
You're thinking, I feel bad for the cop, and I don't necessarily love Mr. Blonde as a person. As a character, he's great.
Right.
But as a person, you don't love him.
He scares the shit out of me.
And then all of a sudden, just a curveball in terms of the story, because I think Mr. Blonde's going to take this cop out.
Yeah.
And then he lights the Zippo, and then all of a sudden, you just hear gunshots.
Yep.
And Mr. Blonde's taken out.
Yep.
And you're like, where the shit did the gun
Yep.
fire come from? And then it cuts over and you see Mr. Orange, Tim Roth, he's blasting the shit out of him.
And he unloads his entire clip.
The whole thing. And you're like, this is another quicker one, but it's a quicker mystery box, which is like, wait a minute. He was just defending the cop. Because when I first watch it, I'm not thinking that Mr. Orange is who he is.
No.
Who's later he's revealed as.
No, not at all, because he's been shot. So obviously he's sacrificed a lot for this heist.
And there feels to be like a rapport between him and Mr. White. And so anyway, he takes out Mr. Blonde, and you're like, what the hell's happening? And then the conversation transpires between the cop who's tied up and Mr. Orange. And Mr. Orange says, hey, I'm a cop.
And then another twist, the cop says, I know.
And he goes, I know, we met.
Because the cop is getting tortured. He got his ear cut off. He got dumped in gasoline. He's about to die, and he didn't give up Mr. Orange sitting right over there.
Which is because that plays into that. That's kind of interesting, because initially I didn't think about it that way. I initially just thought, oh, Mr. Orange is a cop. And then you reverse it that way, and you go, oh, wait, that cop did know.
Yeah.
And he didn't divulge.
He didn't give him
Even
up.
at the point of being burned.
Right.
Like, shit. Or maybe Mr. Orange's face was down so much you couldn't tell until after he shot him. But nonetheless, there's a strong, we talk about like honor among thieves, well, like loyalty among, police officers as well. But it's revealed that Mr. Orange is a cop. So this puts a whole twist on things.
Yeah.
In the sense that now Mr. White has, he's divulged information about himself and where he's lived. And we're wondering, well, what's going to happen to Mr. White? Then it goes to an intertitle. Now that we know that Mr. Orange is a cop, then we see the exposition.
Mm-hmm.
So it goes Mr. Orange, title card, and then it starts playing. This part for me, in terms of just character build and giving context and exposition to the story, this scene, this flashback of Mr. Orange is really fun. I love it.
Oh, it's the longest one for sure.
And it's the longest paced one and timed one, but it's fun.
Yeah, it is. It is.
I don't even know what it is other than the fact that he's a cop and he's undercover and he's trying to figure out how to break into the heist team.
Well, and I like his buddy, or his partner or mentor or whatever.
What's that guy wearing, by the way?
Yeah, exactly. Just unbuttoned shirt.
It cuts to a scene them in a cafe, and there's a black man, and then Tim Roth or Mr. Orange comes in, and they're talking. That they're both part of the force.
Right.
What that guy's wearing like a vest. He's undercover, I'm assuming.
He's got to be.
But still, that wardrobe.
He's kind of showing him the ropes, and he's like, telling the commode story, and then he goes into this whole thing. It cuts to them on a roof or something, and he talks about how you have to know everything inside and out. You got to get on their good side, and you have to absolutely know every little detail about every little story you tell them. And then it actually cuts to Tim Roth telling them a story, and then it cuts to as if he was actually living the story. He goes into a bathroom.
He's not, because it's all a written script.
Exactly.
By his cop buddy that he needs to memorize in order to make it feel authentic as him as a
and all of this was done so well, and the editing is so great. And even he's even in the bathroom telling the story as if he's practicing it. But he comes in the bathroom and he's telling a story about how he's got weed, and there's these cops in there, and there's a dog, and the dog's barking at him, and it's just so well done. It's just such a cool little thing to add in there.
This is where Tarantino shines again in writing, which is like you can take something that whole scene really informationally in terms of a story is irrelevant.
Totally.
Because we already now know that Orange is a cop.
Right.
And you always hear this, when you go to film school and things like, be careful about exposition.
Right. Show, don't tell.
Exactly. Yeah. All that bullshit.
Stuff you teach every week, right?
I don't teach that shit. I go another route. But you know what I'm talking about. Yeah. And so, but informationally, there's nothing there. Nothing.
Right.
That pushes the storyline forward. Is there? There's not really.
No.
I'm running it through my head. I don't think there's anything there because we already know the information. And I always get these things, and I'll go on a rant because it's like I always get, when I have done short films or worked on other projects, you know how it is. You always do like a little spotting session or a little critique session. You show people around you to kind of get vibes on what's happening and how they think about or see it and feel it. And everyone always goes, not that don't show me, don't tell me, but everyone always says, like, I don't want to see the history if I already know the information? In other words, like,
Don't be redundant.
yeah, there's a thing of like, you've already established this piece of information. We don't need to reconstitute it. We don't need to show people again or hear it again or whatever it is. It's already the redundancy.
Right.
And this is redundant. But for some reason, I love this. I love how it is.
It just gives more of a feel to how much work he's put into this.
I love it because after he's sharing, we're seeing this flashback, and he's building rapport with the team, the Mr. With Joe and Nice Guy Eddie. He's trying to build trust, and they're in the restaurant or the nightclub, and they're building trust. But I love the scene where towards the end, right before the heist, and he's in his apartment, and they call him, and he's like, "I'll be right down." They call him, and get ready. We're gonna go prep this thing. And I love Tim Roth is so awesome in this scene. He's ready to go out the door, and he like kind of knocks on the door with his finger.
Yep.
And he's like thinking something in his head. He turns to a mirror. And I will destroy the actual verbatim lines.
Right.
But he says something to the effect of like, paraphrasing. You're the fucking man.
Right.
They don't know who you are.
Right.
You're not going to, lose the secret. He's basically cheering himself on, like building himself up. But I love that so much. It's so well done.
Well,
and
the whole thing is kind of cut like almost like a montage with dialogue.
Yeah.
Because it shows him learning the lines, then practicing it with his partner or whatever, and then now he's on the big stage, and he's actually auditioning essentially to be on this crew, and it's kind of like his final performance, and then it's like he's getting ready for showtime.
He's got to amp himself
the curtain
up.
call, yeah. It's like we're gonna go out there, we're gonna fuck shit up, we're gonna do this.
That's a cool metaphor because I think you could take that and go, that's exactly what it is.
Yeah,
100% in terms of the analogy.
Right.
100%. He goes out, gets in the car, and then we see this POV shot of the cops, and we hear them talking, and they're talking about how he's fucking crazy. Like, why would he want to do this?
Right.
They're basically telling him to kind of find out where he's going, so that they can understand where the heist will be. But that scene's great, and Mr. Orange is Tim Roth's so fun to watch in those scenes. It's like when you can get an actor who carries. Sometimes you get an actor and you're like, I can move on now.
Right.
I don't need to keep watching this guy. Like who? But you get those actors that like can really hold the lens and like really bring us into a feeling or want a desire, like a continual kind of. I want to like keep watching.
Yes.
For like I could keep watching this even though the redundancy's there and there's no real information.
It's interesting.
I just want to watch this guy for another 2 or 3 minutes.
Right.
Like beyond what's already there.
Right.
So his flashback ultimately reveals his preparation to break into the underground and be part of this team so that he can bring them all in. That's his real goal.
Yep.
His real goal is like, I'm going to bust all of them.
Right.
I'm going to break this heist team, underground criminal organization, and I'm going to be a hero.
Yep.
Is essentially his setup. So anyway, he blows away Mr. Blonde. We know that he's a cop, and that kind of a little bit for me. The divulging of that little secret does kind of like revigorate. Okay, now what's going to happen to the other guys when they come back?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Well, and he also says there's cops a half a block away. They're just waiting for Joe to get here.
Yeah, they're waiting for the Godfather. Yeah, that's what I call him. But the
kingpin,
the main guy. Yeah.
Right.
And he's not there yet.
Right.
He supposedly is coming.
Right.
But this whole idea that like Mr. Orange is a cop does kind of reinvigorate even more interest in the story. Because really, if you think about the story up to this point, like there's good points to it, the plots we've discussed. But it's extremely stylistic, right? And I would even venture to say that I think it's almost overly flashy, stylistic. It's a little bit chaotic.
It's Quentin Tarantino.
It's not really like as great as the character. It's a weird thing with Tarantino because even as great as the characters are, the greatest thing about really heartfelt characters, and I don't mean like dramatic. I just mean like ones that you attach to strong. Like I do with Mr. Orange, but it's based on the performance. Like Tim Roth, fun to watch.
Yes.
Like I was saying.
Yeah.
It's the characters good, but Tim Roth's fun to watch.
Right.
That makes sense. So
For
like,
sure. Michael Madsen's fun to watch.
right.
These guys are great actors.
Because none of these characters I really care about.
No.
To be
I
honest.
care about Mr. White a little bit.
A little bit, only because he shows that sympathy that we talked about.
Yes. Yeah.
But ultimately, even then, I don't care so much about him that I want him to be the victor in everything.
No.
Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
In that traditional sense. So it's revealed that. So they come. Now, wait a minute. You got to help me reorganize my storyline here. Because they find Mr. Orange we find out he's a cop. They come back, right?
Yeah, they come back.
Mr. White, nice guy Eddie. I'm missing something, though. When does Joe come?
Joe comes later.
He comes nice guy Eddie, Mr. White, and Mr. Pink come back.
Yeah.
But Joe doesn't return with them.
No, he comes after.
Now I'm getting tired.
Yeah, I know. No, yeah, because the three of them come back, and nice guy Eddie says, "What the fuck happened here?"
Oh, that's right.
And Mr. Orange tries to explain that he was going to kill us all.
That's right. And then you got to, dude, I'm getting tired.
Yeah, no, you're good. I'm the same way. You're good.
I'm starting to lose my focus. I got to reignite this story here. We're talking about Mr. Orange and the three of them coming back. Give me to the next storyline.
So they come back, and Mr. Orange says, Mr. Blonde was torturing the cop, and he's about to kill us all. He was going to kill you guys when you walked in. And nice guy Eddie's like, "Is that the story you're sticking to? That's the story?"
That's right. So, I'm so tired right now.
No, you're good.
I just hit a fucking wall.
No, you're good. I totally understand.
Dude, I don't know what happened.
You're good.
I got to revitalize this here. Hold on. Let me, or unless you got something, you go. But I got to redirect myself.
No, you're good. So, basically, when the guys come back, so when nice guy Eddie and then Mr. Pink and Mr. White come back, and Mr. Orange, they see Mr. Blonde just in a pool of blood, dead on the ground.
That's right. He's up against, yeah.
And so Mr. Orange gives him the story that he was torturing the cop and he was going to kill you guys as soon as you walked in, so I had to shoot him. When he says that, we've already seen Mr. Blonde's backstory. I already know nice guy Eddie's not going to buy that shit.
Yeah. He'll call bullshit on anything.
Exactly.
He's that kind of character.
And then, but plus they're like, it seems to me like from Mr. Blonde's backstory, it seems like they're like brothers. They're horse playing around, in the office, and it just felt like they were, like family.
Yeah, Mr. Blonde's flashback kind of indicates that him and nice guy
Exactly.
have a stronger relationship.
So, and also based on Mr. Orange's backstory, it seems like he kind of came into this late. Like there's history with Mr. White, there's history with Mr. Blonde. There's not that history with Mr. Orange. So
no.
At this point, I'm thinking, oh shit, they're going to sniff him out fast. They're going to sniff him out super fast. And when nice guy Eddie looks at him and says, "That's the story you're going to go with?" Like this, and then he tells that this man did 4 years or whatever it was and could have sold us down the river, but he kept his mouth shut. And you're telling me he was going to kill me when I walked in?
Now is the time?
Right. And then, so that's when I'm like, oh shit, he's in trouble. But then you see Mr. White trying to stick up for Mr. Orange, which is a fleeting thing at this point.
Right.
You just know it's not going to go well.
No.
And then when Joe shows up, and Joe immediately marches up and says, "This man's LAPD. This man's working with the LAPD. We got to take him out."
Yeah.
And Mr. White is still, I don't know where this bond came from. They gave a little backstory of them sitting in the car trying to stake it out, but I don't know where the bond, and this is something that's missing in this movie.
It is missing, but I think the only thing that you could fill in there would be he does say something about he felt responsible that Mr. Orange got shot.
Yeah, and I guess we should talk a little bit about that because they're running out, and this is actually a big point in kind of a.
Well, first, we see Tarantino die.
Yeah, we see Tarantino die. Yes, and
Thank God he killed himself.
I know, seriously. We see him die, and then Mr. White, Mr. Orange are running. They stick up this lady in a car.
She pulls a gun out of the glove.
She pulls
box.
a gun out of the glove box, and this is
dialect
Tim Roth's
coach.
dialect coach. Yeah, shoots him in the gut.
That's probably how she felt because he couldn't get the dialect.
Well, and they said they wanted her in there because she was so rough on him, like as a dialogue coach.
Should have been rougher because
I
I
know.
think he was still like
He
we
was
talked
having a
about.
hard time. He was having a hard time for sure.
I'm not gonna hate on him. I could never do a British accent.
Oh, I
so
couldn't either. I've tried. It's terrible.
I do too.
But she shoots him, and then this is, and I gotta hit this again. This is directly lifted, and call it an homage, call it what you want, but this is directly lifted from City on Fire, like almost to a T.
Yeah.
The undercover cop gets shot, instinctively fires back, just instinctively, and then even the way it's shot, where they hold the gun, they hold on them holding the gun, and they realize what they've done.
Right.
And they're the cops. They're the ones who're supposed to stop this kind of stuff. And they killed someone. They killed someone who's innocent. And they're not supposed to do that. So then we understand that Mr. White was there with him, and he might feel responsible for that. So maybe that's where the bond came from. I don't know. I don't know if that's strong enough.
Yeah, I don't think it is. I this is one thing, like you mentioned, I just have a flaw with, which is like, is it just him, his nature?
I feel like it is.
Because the only thing you can really chalk it up to. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I
Because
feel like it is.
Otherwise, why does he have such an attachment to a guy he's never met?
Right.
Or
right,
really knows?
right.
Or he, it could also be that he has a level of criminal guilt. And what I mean is he's divulged information that he knew he shouldn't have. So he's trying to build that rapport with this guy that he's
could be.
divulged too much to.
That could be. And it's also that thing, this happens a lot with like MLMs or people who get caught up in pyramid schemes or Ponzi schemes, where that thing where you've invested so much.
Not in Utah.
Yeah, not in Utah. Not at all. You've invested so much money, and I can't remember, there's an actual name for this, but you've invested so much money that it's almost more painful to quit and admit you were wrong than just go ahead with it.
Right.
And I can't remember what the name of it is, but it's but it almost seems like that. Like he's divulged his name, he's divulged where he's from, he feels responsible. Like he's so invested in this guy being legit that he can't turn back now.
Yeah, that's and the reality is he may know that he's not, or at least have a hunch, but just doesn't want to believe that hunch.
And I kind of agree with that, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But basically, Joe comes in and says, "This man's working with the LAPD. We got to get rid." And at this nice guy Eddie has killed the cop. By the way,
Yeah.
Cop's dead.
Yeah,
And that was kind of surprising, just out of the blue.
yeah, he takes him out.
But then they get into the famous standoff.
So then you have nice guy Eddie, Joe, who's the dad of nice guy Eddie,
Right.
Mr. White, and this is where I got confused. I remember watching it when I watched it the first time, where Mr. Orange lined up in this. He didn't have anything into the standoff.
No. So Joe.
But there's a weird, because does Mr. and this is what the technical.
I rewound this.
Yeah, because I was trying to figure out who shot who. It was like a Han Solo Greedo situation.
Yeah, it is. I rewound this probably 7 or 8 times trying to figure this out. But basically, so Joe pulls a gun on Mr. Orange. Mr. White says, "Don't do this," pulls a gun on Joe. And then, of course, nice guy Eddie pulls a gun on Mr. White.
Mm-hmm.
And
Don't point a gun at my dad.
the way he delivers that line is so, "Don't quit pointing that gun at my fucking dad. Quit pointing that fucking gun at my dad." And it's so good. It's so good. And basically what happens is Joe shoots. So Mr. White shoots Joe. Nice guy Eddie shoots Mr. White, but Mr. White also turns and shoots him too.
This sounds like a game of Clue.
It's not done
Colonel
well.
Mustard in the library with the
Right.
lead pipe.
Right.
Like what we're trying to do. I can't decipher it.
And this is why it's better that they have a little bit wider shot, because you can't really figure out what's going on.
So Mr. White shoots Joe.
Shoots Joe. And I think he turns.
He has to, because this is where I got confused. He has to turn and then shoot
He does turn.
nice guy Eddie.
He does.
Or does Mr. Orange shoot him from below?
Well, and he could, but I remember Mr. Orange's clip is empty from shooting Mr. Blonde.
Right.
But Mr. White does turn. It doesn't look like he turns all the way to Nice Guy Eddie, though. That's the thing. He does turn, and a shot goes off, and then Nice Guy Eddie falls. So I think the whole idea is that Mr. White shoots both Joe and Nice Guy Eddie.
Yeah, because ultimately, anybody who has seen Reservoir Dogs can correct us.
Right.
With their,
and I'm sure they will.
I'm sure they will, which is great. But everyone's on the floor, practically or nearly dead.
Except Mr. Pink.
Yeah, he hit under the...
He's a professional, man. He is. I love this guy. He's a fucking professional. He saw the shit going down, so he hid under the stairs.
It's funny because now that you say that, we were so entrapped in the standoff, we literally in our own discussion forgot about Mr. Pink.
This is why I kept hitting on the whole professional thing, because he is. He sees the shit going down. He knows what's going to happen. And guess what? He's the only one who gets away, and he gets away with the diamonds.
He hides under the little ramp.
Yeah.
That's by them. He's just hiding underneath.
Yeah.
Everyone falls to the ground, dead or nearly dead.
Right.
Mr. White, Harvey Keitel, is moaning and has obviously been shot, but not dead yet.
Same thing with Mr. Orange.
And Mr. Orange is still hanging out.
Yep.
With that gunshot wound to the gut.
And a second gunshot.
And a second gunshot wound. I mean, Mr. Orange is... He's really wants
Superman.
He's Superman. He really he wants to be the hero.
Yeah,
he wants to make sure he's hanging on.
Right.
Because he wants to make sure that the LAPD knows that he brought these guys.
Right, exactly.
But Mr. Pink comes out clean.
And this is why I love him, because he's the only one who kept a level head, and he grabbed the diamonds and he ran. He wasn't trying to help anybody. He wasn't trying to make sure everyone was dead.
And to be clear in the storyline, the diamonds were brought back from Nice Guy Eddie, Mr. White.
It was kind of glossed over, it feels like.
Because it wasn't evident. I don't recall it ever being like a point in like where you see the suitcase or the briefcase.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Right.
But that just so that we're clear on the storyline, it was brought back. He did indeed stash it.
Right. He did.
And then they had brought it back. But he gets away, and Mr. White's moaning. This ending was kind of weird.
Yeah.
For me.
It seemed a little Quentin Tarantino kind of being a little artsy fartsy, trying to do it without doing it.
To be honest, I felt cheated.
Totally.
You know what I mean? So what ends up happening is you have Mr. White, who's moaning and shot, Mr. Orange, who's also been wounded now twice, and once again, Mr. White's on death's door.
Yeah.
And he crawls over to Mr. Orange
to hold him while he dies
him.
or something.
This is where I took umbrage.
Right.
Because I just didn't feel like, what did we just watch? This is the ending for me is hard because I didn't ultimately care at all.
No.
So I had gone through this little wild ride of style and some cool things and some fun characters and great dialogue, but then the ending was just kind of blah.
Yeah.
For me.
For sure.
That's the feeling of being
It's a little anticlimactic, which is weird considering they just had a Mexican standoff and everyone died. But it's just you don't care about these characters enough to be really concerned.
It's kind of interesting because the movie's not really about anything.
It's not.
You know what I mean? It's like a splice of life of a bunch of criminal jewelry heist guys.
Mm-hmm.
And then it just kind of ends with all of them killing themselves.
Right.
I don't know. Maybe he's trying to go with a deeper subtext that I'm not following. But the movie at the end for me, Mr. White goes over. They're embracing Mr. Orange, Mr. White. They're kind of consoling each other in death.
Right.
And then you start to hear externally the sirens going on. So the cops are coming. Joe's dead. Everyone's dead anyway.
Right.
The cops
so much for being half a block away and going to swoop in as soon as Joe showed up.
Right. Yeah, well, I mean, where were they on the timing?
Exactly, and that was something that bugged me too.
That logistical error.
Right.
Come on, Quentin.
And then you can hear the cars coming from a mile away. They slowly build and slowly build.
It takes forever for half a mile or for half a block.
Exactly.
But the ending, this embrace, they're both still alive. They're moaning. And Mr. White is kind of almost cradling Mr. Orange.
Right.
And then Mr. Orange, in his last little breath of life, really, says, I'm a cop.
Why? I mean, why? At this point, what? Why?
And he says, I'm sorry. Does he feel guilt because he lied and because Mr. White trusted him?
See, and this is where on City on Fire, it's handled much better because he actually explains why he's telling him. He's like, I feel like I owe you. He actually says it on City on. So this whole thing's been lifted directly from this movie. Like that's why I have a hard time with it being called an homage, because it's basically the same thing. It's the same thing exactly.
So City on Fire also has a shitty ending.
Yeah, well, I get, and I haven't seen. I've just seen bits and kind of comparisons, but he does explain. He's like, I feel like I owe you, and I can't remember what it was, but it was. There's at least an explanation.
Yeah, the only thing I could compare to that is like when he does say I'm sorry. I think it's partly in the fact that this guy trusted him.
Yeah.
So like. You know what I mean? Like Mr. White
Right.
trusted Mr. Orange enough to give him where he's from and what his name is. And also like at the end, before he divulges that he's a cop, he's like, cradling him
Right.
to like try to comfort him in
Plus,
death.
he basically just got shot to death for sticking up for him.
Yeah, for defending him.
If that was me, even if I'm on death's door, I think I'm going to let him just not know. Just be self-satisfied in the fact that you stuck up for me. Like, I'm not going to tell you that you were wrong. The last thing I do is tell you that you were wrong.
Right.
And everyone died because of that.
Right. So I think the only thing that you could chalk it up to would be that he feels that guilt for having Mr. White trust him so heavily.
I think so, yeah.
It's there. But anyway, I don't think it's not really about anything. Like there's no...
It's true.
Last week we talked about Who's That Knocking at My Door, and it also has hints of really not being about anything.
But not about anything.
And so I just, we could discuss that in probably more depth, but the ending, ultimately the cops come in, and after Mr. Orange divulges to Mr. White, hey, I'm a cop, Mr. White holds his gun to Mr. Orange's head, and then the cops come in and they're like, hey, put the gun down.
And the camera's pushing in the whole time.
The camera's pushing in, and then you hear gunfire, and and Mr. White falls over, but you don't see him fall. You just see him fall out of frame, and it just kind of sits.
Well, first you hear a gunshot, and that's presumably
his shooting Mr. Orange.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just done so sloppily.
That's what the other thing is. The ending not only doesn't mean anything, but also technically it doesn't really. It's not because he's Tarantino's usually pretty deliberate and good at how to execute the style. It's not like what happened.
Yeah, it's like it fell flat. Like he didn't know how to execute this final thing.
Yeah, in all of its kind of grandiose, exploitive nature of Tarantino, I just think it's kind of like a shrug at the end.
Yeah.
At the end.
I agree. I agree. Yeah. Okay.
That
was cool. It was cool. Whatever happened, it was cool.
So this is Reservoir Dogs. A couple little details that are some fun backstory trivia. And we're not validating whether these are absolutely authentic or not, but these are ones you can find. The film's budget was so low that many of the actors simply used their own clothing as wardrobe. I don't believe that.
Yeah.
It says, maybe they had $1.2 or $1.5 million. Most notably, Chris Penn's track jacket. I could see that.
I could see him wearing that, totally. Cruising around L.A. in that thing.
Yeah. Now, this is kind of cool, though, for independent filmmakers. One of the things we do in the podcast, we try to do, like, first-time directors, because they're all a little different. You see the growth, like we talked about last week with the Scorsese. But this is kind of fun, because how do you get wardrobe? What do you do as you're making a movie? Like when you have no money, like how do you resource or pull together the resources? It says the signature black suits, which by the way, for those that haven't seen the movie yet, they all wear the same suit.
Right.
All the Mr. Black, Mr. White, Mr. Orange, Mr. Pink, all of them. Signature black suits were provided by a designer for free because of her love for American crime film genres. That sounds about right. She just gave him free wardrobe.
Look at Tarantino working the designers.
Well, I mean, look, if you're a first-time filmmaker, you got
to do it.
You got to do it.
Yeah.
This is what it says: the budget wouldn't cover police assistance for traffic control. So in the scene where Buscemi forces a woman out of her car and drives off in it, he could only do so when the traffic lights were green.
I buy that.
It's a quick scene.
But what about the scene where he's running down the street with the cops?
They might have just guerrillaed that shit.
They may have,
because that's not like.
But there's a lot of extras. He's pushing people over. Like,
but I just
mean cops chasing after him. They're shooting.
Because of the way it's shot is so simple, which is like you could literally get in a car and just go down the street anywhere in the valley, and hopefully cross your fingers that a cop doesn't pull you over for a permit. I mean, it wouldn't put it past them. But yeah, you're right. Here's an interesting fact. I want to hear what you think about this one. Quentin Tarantino was originally going to play Mr. Pink.
Doesn't surprise me.
Although he made a point of letting all the other actors audition, Buscemi came in to read for it, and Tarantino told him that he really wanted the part for himself.
Oh, my God.
And that the only way Buscemi could possibly wrestle it from him was to do a killer audition. And Buscemi duly complied.
Absolutely.
Well, yeah, because Tarantino's a great filmmaker, no questions. But if you're talking about acting, like Buscemi's going to blow him out of the water.
For sure.
I just thought it was funny.
I mean, Tarantino, well, although I was going to say...
He's not bad.
No, I was going to say, I'm surprised he didn't want Mr. Blonde, because I think he could play a good psychopath, because he did great.
Like Madsen.
In Dusk Till Dawn, he was great. Oh, yeah, of course, not like Madsen, but
you're right.
He played a great psychopath from Dusk Till Dawn.
It's not that he can't act. He can.
He can.
And he's believable, but, there's like tiers to acting.
Right.
It's like, do you want to have like Michael Jordan or Steve Kerr? Steve Kerr's a good player.
Right.
But Michael Jordan's Michael Jordan.
He's not going to get you a title on his own.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Tarantino is a good cameo. He's a good cameo, and that's what he should be. Like in Pulp Fiction, he's quirky, you know, and you see him and he's good. Like it's good. And he
comes in as a day player, lands a few lines and walks off. Or is it gone?
Adds a little levity to the scene, and then he's gone.
Or in the case of this film, they come cruising around. He bumps into a car in front of him after the heist. They're running from cops. He's all bloody and battered. He says, "I can't see."
Yeah,
I can't see. And then Mr. Orange is like, "It's just blood in your eyes." And then all of a sudden he's dead.
And then telling a story about a big dick in a cafe, and then that's it. I mean, that's what he's there for.
Oh man. Yeah. In an interview on BBC in 2009. Tarantino said he was proud the movie is often on the top 10 heist movies, even though you never actually see the heist.
True.
I'll give him that.
True.
One that I read that's not from here, though, that I want to bring up is Tarantino, in another interview, mentioned that he based a lot of this film off of The Killing. The Killing is a 50s movie by Stanley Kubrick, and it's a heist film on a racetrack.
Okay.
And he was like, you're saying City of Fire for Tarantino, and in terms of structure and the story, his influence or his inspiration was apparently The Killing.
I could see that as an inspiration, but he basically just stole City of Fire.
Well, there's actually things in The Killing like
Fire.
they kind of end in a bit of a similar fashion.
Oh, do they?
In some
okay.
In some ways. Here's something. Mr. Orange's apartment, right, where he does that great scene that we talked about, where he's pointing at himself, trying to amp himself up, cheer himself up. Or not cheer himself up, but get ready for the big show with the criminals. In his apartment was the upstairs to the warehouse where most of the movie takes place.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Did you notice all the coffins in that warehouse?
I didn't notice them.
Yeah. They're
I'll have to go
standing
back and
up.
see
They're
them.
kind of covered, but you can see them. It was a mortuary, I guess.
Oh, that's interesting.
Where they shot that.
Tim Roth refused to read for the film.
What?
So it says he did insist on going out drinking with Tarantino
Okay.
and Harvey Keitel. He agreed to read for them when they were all drunk.
Oh my God.
So I won't read it, but okay, I'll read it if I get you a little
Yeah.
tipsy first.
Can you imagine going out and drinking with those three?
Oh, man, that'd be fun.
That'd be hilarious.
Filmed in 35 days.
Wow.
That's pretty fast.
I mean, it makes sense. There's not a lot of
it's not-
locations.
right.
Yeah. Nothing complicated.
A couple more here because they're kind of fun. Here's a potentially controversial one. Tarantino had to fight Miramax boss Harvey Weinstein. Harvey Weinstein. I almost got him mixed up there. To keep the torture scene in the film.
I heard that. Weinstein wanted to get rid of it.
As Weinstein felt it would have a serious negative effect on the audience. And it does. That burning scene we talked about, you want to stop the film.
Very true. But it's also
it
the most
doesn't-
iconic film.
it's the most
or
iconic scene.
Yeah.
And Weinstein relented. That's a first.
I know. In many aspects of his
Many
life.
aspects of his life. Whatever happened to that anyway,
Yeah.
that storyline. Is he still in?
Is he in jail?
I don't know.
He
what's
might be
going
in
on.
jail.
I haven't followed
I
it.
know.
We already talked about that one. I'll edit this part. I just want to grab a couple more. This is so another one is this is kind of interesting. More recently, apparently, Steve Buscemi in another podcast said everyone had a difficult time with Lawrence Turney. That's Joe.
Mhm.
That's the actor who plays Joe because he was easily distracted and kept forgetting his lines.
Oh my God.
Tarantino and everyone else were so upset with him that Quentin fired Lawrence on the third day of filming.
You're kidding me.
That's what it says.
If he's in the movie.
So I don't know how many days they took to film with him. Maybe they readjusted the schedule and shot him out before.
I did hear
Fired him?
something. I read something about he and Madsen getting into it.
There was and apparently there was tiffs between some of the actors, particularly though Lawrence Tierney was like the one that was on a day off during the shoot. Tierney was arrested for allegedly pulling a gun on his nephew.
Oh, you've got to be kidding me. Can you imagine trying to manage this as your first movie?
That's what he said. He said, Tarantino said Tierney was taken from his Bell arraignment to the set.
You're kidding me.
So that's a lot of pressure. I mean, as a first-time director, you're like, where's this?
God.
That's so much to take on. It's crazy. Let's do one more here, and then we'll kind of get into kind of a final summation of it all. The film contains 272 uses of the word fuck.
Someone sat down and counted it. That's hilarious.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. That's a lot.
That is a lot. If that's true, that is a lot of fucks.
That's a lot of fucks.
Holy cow. Okay, last one, I promise. Or no, two more.
All right.
The line where Mr. White tells Mr. Pink, "I need you cool. Are you cool?" Was added into the script after a conflict between Lawrence Tierney and Michael Madsen. To break the scuffle and continue shooting, Tarantino said to Tierney, "Larry, I need you cool. Are you cool?"
Nice.
And that was literally Keitel's ad lib into the film based
Nice.
on what Tarantino told Tierney. That's great. And then I think a good little ending here to get us into the final wrap up. Editor Sally Menke's agent originally lobbied for her not to take the film.
Really?
Menke disagreed and went on to edit Quentin Tarantino's first 6 films.
What would the cinematic world look like if she had not taken?
I mean,
that
it goes
job?
back to that conversation. I really think, look, Tarantino's great.
Yeah.
I like his stuff. I'm not in the same arena as most people where I'm a Tarantino fanatic.
Yeah, me neither.
And I will actually, while we're talking about this, say that this is not, like, people hold this and Pulp Fiction up there as their top 2 or 3
Of
you know,
Tarantino.
of Tarantino films. Usually it's like Pulp Fiction,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe you'll hear people throw like a Kill Bill
Yeah.
or something in there. Look, I like all those movies. I do. I think they're good movies, but they're not in my favorite top tier, and neither is Reservoir Dogs. Not even in the top 3.
Oh, really?
Maybe not even in the top 5.
So what's your top? What's your number one?
I have the most abstract Tarantino film. Guess what? Tell me what you think based on his portfolio might be my favorite film.
Okay, I'm looking at it right now.
This will be a fun little game. What
The Hateful Eight?
No. You get one more guess.
It's not his segment in Sin City.
No.
Okay, all right.
That's a pass.
Jackie Brown.
Yep. 100%.
That's actually I know quite a few people who like that more than anything else he's done.
I don't know anybody, so I want to meet him because everybody I ask, well, I do know, you're right. There's always a few.
Yeah.
But it's not one that people think, oh, Tarantino.
Right.
It's not Kill Bill. It's not Pulp Fiction. It's not Reservoir Dogs. And like you were mentioning, getting back to what you were saying, we're talking about Sally Menke editing his first 6 films. Like, what would it be like? Like, I mean, so much to credit to her for how she helped kind of shape his career, because I think that, as all of us know, like, not taking away anything from the director, it is an auteur medium. This is the visionary medium, right? Filmmaking. But the editing means so much. And I think she helped, like, if you watch his films, she just helped shape that style and that brand of what he is and what we see him as today.
Well, I mean, I'm obviously very biased because I'm an editor. That's my job.
Right, me too.
So I'm very biased, but I think editing is crucial. I mean, it's crucial. You can have the best movie in the world, and if the editing sucks, the movie's going to suck, and vice versa.
Right.
You could have a pile of shit, and you have a good editor, a killer editor, and you got a good piece of cinema.
Yep, 100%. And anyways, I think she's got a lot of she should have a lot of credit to how the movie comes about.
Yeah, I agree.
Quickly before we get into the last little bit, one more thing is so I'm saying Jackie Brown. I won't get into the depth of why because it will take too long, but I will say that that's my number one Tarantino film, and people go, "That's insane." It's a great movie. I love that. One thing I love about Tarantino films is his ensemble cast.
Yes,
he always has the best actors.
He does.
So that's great. Where would you put Reservoir Dogs on his film portfolio for you? I'm just guessing, but I'm saying it like in that 5 spot.
Yeah, I haven't seen everything he's done. I actually like Kill Bill Part 2. I like that one a lot.
It's fun.
The first one's fun too, but the second one I felt like the story was a lot better.
Well, you get into that. Also, to be honest, like Kill Bill Volume 1 is that little bit of story set up in some regards.
Right.
And you get a little more payoff in Volume 2.
For sure. And it's way more stylized, and I feel like they really kind of dug in. They put the style behind them a little bit in Volume 2 and kind of went for that. That's up there for me. I would probably put, again, I'm not a huge Tarantino fan, but I would put this I'd probably put Pulp Fiction number 1, and this is close to ousting that, but like we talked about, the ending is just flat. It's just so flat.
Yeah, there's nothing. Well, look, there's nothing there throughout the whole film. Well, I think maybe in a traditionalist way, that's why I like Jackie Brown so much.
Right.
Because it's kind of got that constant flow and through line of a story almost. Sure.
And Django Unchained, I actually really liked until he got all Tarantino and got all bloody.
Yeah.
Like, I thought the story was great until
I really like Django
until the end, and then it just was like, Jesus, like I was invested, and now it just got totally unrealistic. I didn't like Inglourious Bastards very much.
Oh, see, it's in probably my top 3.
See, I love the part with the evil Nazi guy. Again, I have an affinity for villains. I thought he was fantastic, and I can't remember his name off the top of my head. Christopher Waltz. They needed more of that, or they needed more of the Bastards. They needed one of those. But it felt like it just felt too split.
I mean, Eli Roth's character is awesome.
Oh, of course.
The bear Jew.
Of course, yeah.
Or the Jew bear.
The Jew bear, yeah, of course.
Which is great. Yeah, I mean, his body of work's fun, and it is impressive. Look, coming out the gate with Reservoir Dogs is super fun. It's a fun movie. I think anybody should go see it. There's a shock value, there's an awe value, there's an intrigue in terms of character. The story ends up a little dry towards the end. and there's not a whole lot of pure attachment to rooting for what's happening necessarily. It's more a train wreck in the sense of like, whoa, and then you move on.
Right. My favorite thing that Tarantino's ever done, though, is not he didn't direct it, but he wrote it. And
Let me guess real quick.
Okay.
The 1995 ER episode Motherhood.
Oh, of course. You nailed it.
I'm looking at his
it.
body of work,
No.
and it says ER TV series 1995 Motherhood episode 1.
No,
one episode.
My favorite is directed by Robert Rodriguez, and that's From Dusk Till Dawn. He wrote it and he acted in it.
That's right.
Love that movie. Love it.
That's the one with George Clooney in it.
Yeah, and I'm not a huge Robert Rodriguez fan either. But I love you get halfway through.
I like El Mariachi.
Oh, that's great. It's great.
That's a fun movie.
It is. It is fun.
That's actually good. I think wasn't that his first film?
That was his first one.
So that's one we should probably end up doing later.
And there's a lot of fun tidbits about that one, about how he
that's a
shot
fun
that.
one.
Yeah.
That's a fun movie. It's good. It's really good.
It is.
Yeah, I'll put in, did you see Once Upon a Time in Hollywood?
No, I haven't seen that yet.
I loved it.
Did you?
Mm-hmm.
I've heard mixed things. People either love it or they hate it.
It's in my top 3.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, see, but I'm the contrarian. Most people are, like I said, they're going to say Kill Bill,
Right.
Pulp Fiction, Reservoir Dogs. I'm going Jackie Brown, Inglourious Bastards, and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, top 3. Okay, so we'll get into some of these ratings. Let's get into... so anyway, everyone dies except for Mr. Pink.
The professional of the bunch.
The
pro.
So the ratings here, we'll start out with the Rotten Tomatoes. To the critics, certified fresh, 91%.
For critics. I can see that.
The audience comes in at 94% out of 445,000 user ratings.
That's insane.
That's a lot of ratings. And then IMDb comes in out of 10, they're at 8.3 out of 853,000 ratings.
Which is really high for IMDb. It
is high.
It feels like to me IMDb is always on the low side.
No, that is high. 8.3 is pretty high. I think on IMDb, and you're talking about 1 million people rating the film.
Yeah.
So 8.3 is a damn good score.
That's really good.
So give us your final summation of the film, Alan, and give us a little bit of a rating on Reservoir Dogs.
I really like it. I think it's enjoyable. It is definitely more style over substance, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. And again, that torture scene it grips me. I mean, it's
so good.
It's very, very good, and that's why you see it homaged in so many films and referenced all over pop culture because it's great. The ending does suck though. Like it falls flat. It's not like it's a bad ending. It just falls flat. There's nothing.
Bad.
It's just.
I'm not.
It feels
gonna
lazy to
pardon
me.
it. I think it's a bad ending. I just do.
It feels lazy to me. I don't know what they could have done to save it, but I think it just kind of sucks. It's blah. So that definitely knocks it down. I'm gonna give it a 7.
Okay. 7 out of 10.
And
Mr. Blondes?
Yeah, 7 out of 10 cut off ears.
You would go that direction.
Yeah, of course.
But horror freak.
And if it wasn't, yeah, exactly. And if it wasn't for this cast, I would have knocked it down to maybe a 6.5 or a 6. But this cast,
yeah,
and the stuff that's done well is done so well that I'm kind of intrigued by the whole thing. So, and I'm a notoriously hard grader.
There's an intrigue to it, like you said. There's no mention. There's a lot of, we talked about the stylistic look of it and the feel, just kind of how it's put together. It's a little different just in terms of structure, not story structure, but just technical structure of
right.
He's not really trying to follow a lot of rules necessarily.
Right.
He just doesn't.
Right.
You get that early on in terms of him as a filmmaker. He don't give a shit.
Yep.
He just wants to do what he's going to do.
Yep.
I love that. Unapologetic, Here's my story. Even so much so is stretching the idea that there's some form of plagiarism there.
Totally.
In a sense. Like
as far as I'm
mentioned.
concerned, totally. But he did it really well, though.
But he just doesn't care.
Yeah.
And there's always something about Tarantino films that I love. And, a lot of times as a filmmaker, you go into something, you're thinking too much about what the audience is going to think. And I get the vibe that that's not really his modus operandi. That's not his approach to the whole thing. He just does what he likes.
Yep.
And he doesn't give a shit about what anybody else thinks.
Right. And
it pays off. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
I read somewhere about him, by the way. He said, I don't let people read my scripts.
Interesting.
And for a filmmaker, mostly when you did a draft or two and you're kind of polishing it up, you hand it off, you want to get some ideas back, some feedback. He's like, I don't let them read the script like my friends and my colleagues and other people that I like and trust. I don't let them read my scripts. I read them to them.
Okay.
So they don't get a physical copy that they get to read. But they come and he reads them the script.
Something tells me it's not just about conveying what's in there and the way he wants it to come across. He wants to act that shit out. Like, he loves being in front of the camera.
He loves being an actor.
He loves being in the limelight.
But I'm not going to lie to you. I want to be a fly on the wall of him reading a script.
Oh, it'd be a blast.
How fun would that be?
It'd be a blast.
His new project's the Untitled Star Trek project.
I saw that.
This would be an interesting script because I don't know that he's writing it, but he might. I assume that he will because he writes all his own stuff.
Right.
So I don't. That's a big franchise, though. That's not just going into something original.
It's interesting that he is interested in taking over something like that.
It's his last film, Alan.
It's just
that's what he proclaims.
We'll see. I don't buy it. He likes the limelight too much.
Yeah, he seems a little showboaty that way.
Yeah, for sure. I
agree.
That's okay.
I don't have a problem.
Yeah, I don't either.
We like him for that flair.
Yeah, exactly.
In the culture we go, he's an iconic figure culturally. He's his own brand. Everybody loves that. We all love that about him, whether we think that it's agreeable or you know what I mean?
Right.
We like it.
For sure.
As a film instructor in the college, and at the university, it's like you mention Tarantino and the students go gaga.
They go
they
crazy.
Love it.
People just cream their pants over this guy.
They love it.
They love it.
I'm not in that camp all the way. Look, I like
that might
stuff.
be kind of what soured me on him a little bit. Is that just the blind love that people have for him in when I was in film school? It's just a little off-putting. Because he's good, but he's not God.
He's pretty good.
I mean, he's good.
But once again, it goes for me more than anything. What I love about him, it's not so much that he's the most effective, most prominent, most elaborate. He's some of that storyteller.
Mm-hmm.
It's that he doesn't care. He does him.
Right.
So when you talk about learning a lesson about just be you, there's something true and authentic to the way he puts movies together, and I love that.
For sure.
And it does carry that. So when you go, oh, it's a Tarantino film, we know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But it's not because it's because of how he does it, but it's also really because he just doesn't care.
He just does it. He's just going to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love that. One little qualm I have before I get into my rating. Why does the poster look like... Now, there's multiple posters, right?
Mm-hmm.
But more than anything, why does the special edition poster... It's this one right here.
Okay, yeah. I've seen that one.
Why does the special edition poster look like the That Thing You Do poster from Tom Hanks? The coloration. It's guys with the coloring and stars and lines. It looks like what? I was just noticing that. I don't know why that came to my mind. It's not an exact replica, but the color scheme,
right?
And the
the
vibe.
There are themes to movie posters, obviously, and it seems like that is more. And you'll have to look it up, the special edition one, but that is more along the lines of a romantic comedy type thing.
That's because if you look at the Exactly. It looks like that. It does. It has the color
Right,
scheme and
right.
otherwise of a romantic comedy.
Even the typecase, it feels like it's.
It doesn't feel indie.
Uh-uh.
It feels like raw, like first film. It feels like a fucking marketing team jumped in and was like, let's color scheme it this way.
Exactly.
What the hell were they doing? Because that original poster, this one here, that shit's cool.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
I hate that.
It's almost the silhouetted black and white figures of the 6 guys.
It's great.
Yeah.
Looks like it's on a cardboard box.
It's cool. Okay. So anyway, I digress. Ratings. So you're at, you said 7.
7.
7 out of 10 cutoff years.
Yep.
IMDb's at 8.3. I'm going not at the highest level of my Tarantino films. I'm going to actually agree with you across the board. I'm going with a 7.
Wow.
Yeah. For the idea that I'm entertained the entire time, stylistically intrigued, not with the exception of the part with Mr. Blonde nearly ready to burn up this cop, not really emotionally involved in the sense of like, I want to know everything about these characters and I want to, feel it.
Right.
That scene gives me more anxiety than anything.
For sure.
But intriguing, interesting, entertaining. Like we mentioned, I think a poor ending. I'll just go out and say it's bad. I don't think it's a good ending at all, both technically and how you sum it up. It just cuts and he's like, here we go. That's fine.
I don't know. I know what he's trying to do, but maybe frame it differently. I don't know. I just think.
I think a big part of it's the technical approach to it. It just doesn't feel like I feel like he of all people could have done better technically on how to end it out.
For sure.
So I'm going with you on the 7. Budget was an estimated $1.2 million. Opening weekend, US 2.8. So it didn't do fantastic. The cumulative gross worldwide was 2.8. Like if you're looking at it financially, 1.2 to make and 2.8 on the other side. So it wasn't like we talked about in the beginning of the podcast.
Right.
It wasn't this financial success, although it was critically acclaimed and well received at film festivals.
The Weinstein's got some money in their pockets, but I'm sure they would have hoped for more.
Yeah. And by the way, that's a whole nother side story. This was Miramax, owned by Harvey Weinstein. So we'll go 7 out of 10. I'll stick with you on that. And this is Reservoir Dogs. I think anybody, once again, if you're a Tarantino fan, of course, you've seen it, I'm sure. If you haven't seen it, I still suggest watching it. It's a fun watch.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of fun.
Entertaining.
Yeah.
So, that's a big part to the movies. Like, we like to go to be entertained and enjoy ourselves. Sometimes I like other things too, emotional or intellectual challenges or whatever it might be. But if you're looking for a quickie in terms of having fun and just kind of not always kind of being interested on what's happening on the screen, this is a good movie for that.
Yeah, I think so. I honestly think it probably could have used a score. I think there's some drama could have been heightened a little bit with the right score in there.
But if you think about it, most of his films never have a score.
Yeah, and
they're all just
I like
music
that,
tracks.
But I'm just thinking like the standoff was very interesting, but it wasn't overly suspenseful.
You wanted like a Sergio Leone spaghetti western.
Maybe not that over the top. Maybe not that, but something to just up the tension a little bit.
No, I get it.
Because it was intriguing, and I wanted to see what happened, but I wasn't nervous.
I think it's also I wasn't either, and I think and that could have helped kind of heighten that anxiety towards the end. But I think that one last little takeaway would be anybody who wants to write specifically or act should watch the movie.
Definitely.
Because even though the writing doesn't plot structure wise get us overly emotionally involved, the style and the tone of the writing is incredible. Right. And of course, like we mentioned at the beginning, the performances are phenomenal.
Yep.
So Reservoir Dogs, go check it out. Quentin Tarantino's first feature film. This kind of introduces the world to Tarantino. And one thing we do get, by the way, Alan, is that we know this guy can make movies.
Yeah, he can.
You know what I mean?
No doubt. From the get-go.
Out the gate, you go, like him, love him, hate him, don't love, you're not thoroughly, whatever it is, you get the real quickly that this guy can put together a good story.
Which is saying
or a
something.
good movie. A movie, I should say.
Because you look at Scorsese, and he was in film school, and his first, in my opinion at least, was a total disaster. Tarantino comes from a video store. And
which it might be a better film school.
It might be.
In some ways, because what I always found interesting about his story, by the way, is people would drive to that video store to talk to Quentin. Because he
doesn't surprise me.
This is a true story. On a regular basis, they'd go to that store to rent from there because they wanted him to give him the obscure or give him the details on a movie or listen to him go, hey, here's what this movie is.
Right.
They liked the way that he was passionate about talking about movies and also his knowledge about all the films.
Yeah. Well,
so they would go out of their way to go to that video rental store.
Doesn't surprise me.
So, and it maybe that's a great education, by the way, just watching movies. Speaking of watching movies, go check it out, Reservoir Dogs by Quentin Tarantino. Next week, we'll keep the podcast rolling. Stick with us. Go subscribe. We're at www.tameaperture.com. You can go find all the social media links there, and you can also listen to the podcast right there on the website. This is Gabe and Alan with the Tame Aperture podcast signing out. Until next time, take care.
The Tame Aperture podcast is produced by Dutch Angle Pictures in association with Studio B Productions. Listen, watch, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, and YouTube.